what's the story? I would usually say apologies for the minor technical difficulties, but today we had some major technical difficulties, but we're on a half an hour later. How's your day gone so far? You're in the opposite end of the spectrum with your day kind of rounding down and mine just beginning, but what have you been up to?
Today, Wednesdays are pretty laid back. I just have a few classes in the morning. And then, I don't know, I honestly had a nap this afternoon for an hour and a half. We're in the middle of the wettest summer / this time of the year, whatever, in Sydney. So I just kicked back and fell asleep to the sound of rain. It's nice.
Dead right, mate. Dead right.
Yeah.
So you're not at the end of term yet, but you're at the end of the athletic season, essentially, or towards the end of it, is it?
Yeah, last week was the Nationals athletics. So yeah, we're pretty much looking to going into an off season pretty shortly now.
So it sounds like you probably have a lot more time on your hands. That's why you had the nap, I suppose, because you're not going away coaching this evening. Is it nice to wind down after a long season of coaching, or are you already kind of itching to get back to it and wondering what am I going to do with myself?
I'm already itching. I mean, I'm not really having a complete break because within our training environment, we don't have just competitive athletes, I'd say it's almost 50-50 people who are competing. And then it's also just like awesome punters who want to learn how to run. And then also on a Friday evening, we do like a once a week thing with some exercise phys and physios and some team sport guys as well. So I'm still coaching like 4 times a week, but I would say that without competition, just like the heat of it all is like toned down slightly, and it's a bit more relaxing, and the decision making isn't as stressful and stuff like that. So it is nice to just. I was looking forward to the season, just winding down, and it feels good now.
But the interesting part of that as well is the season is winding down for you yourself too. So then obviously you're going to have more energy to give to the coaching, I guess, because you're not expending so much energy in your own training.
Yeah. I mean, my own training, like I didn't even finish out the year. I got Corona, early Feb, just like on the weekend of our state competition. But even before then, like my own training is such a meme. Like I just do sort of what I feel like. I don't program, I don't periodize anything, at least the last year and a half. I've just and I compete when I have the juice. And I was finding anyway, when I got back into teaching after the summer holidays, that my juice was starting to run out a little bit. So I'd already surrendered the season and just wanted to really focus on making sure those who wanted to do nationals had the chance and got a lot of attention. Yeah.
You must be quite good at realizing when you're burning the candle at both ends then, and realizing when you're pushing a little bit too hard.
Because I do it all the time. Like I've done it way too many times. Yeah, I just got to leave it alone. So, my mum or my partner, or people who I coach with, they're like, "You're fried, mate," and I'm like, "I know. I'll just take it easy." Yeah.
What is your cue for that? How do you pick up on that? Is it just your processing time is worse? Is it you're just more stressed? Is it you're not as sharp as you usually are? All of the above?
It's everything. It's everything. Yeah, and sleep quality and stuff like that. I'm also a type 1 diabetic, so I find that just like my control of like my blood glucose and just my like self-control to have good dietary decisions and things like that, just all stuck for a bit. And sometimes taking it easy for a moment just makes life a little bit better. Yeah.
Mate, I noticed that because I noticed on a video you were wearing a freestyle Libra. Is that what they're called? The blood glucose monitor thing on your arm.
Yeah, I actually wear like a Libra is like a one type of constant glucose monitoring system. I think it's probably the most popular, or that, or a Dexcom. Yeah, I've got like a Medtronic thing which is attached to an insulin pump. But yeah, I rock that all the time.
Yeah, so what I was thinking was, I was like, either he's a diabetic or he is the most interested coach I've ever seen in terms of blood glucose response to both your nutrition and your exercise. And he's doing another one of his small little or what would you even call them, experiments on himself. But no, it's the
No, I
former.
actually need it. Yeah, they're becoming more popular. Like even at the Rio Olympics, I remember a Brazilian high jumper wearing a CGM, and I had like this weird ethical conflict because I'm like, this isn't even that available for diabetics. It's still, it cost me like $250 a month to have this thing, right? But they're becoming more people are using them for sport, which I find interesting. I don't know. I've never thought to recommend it to anyone. We'll see how we go in the future. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I did my final year project on them, and we used them, and they actually sent us a load of free ones to use on golfers, and we put them on golfers, and
Nice.
we examined what they were eating on a daily basis in the days running up to, say, their competition, and then during the round. And basically their diets were so bad that it was very hard to infer any results from it. Like they'd be going out, they'd be having a Lucozade and a Mars bar. That's all they'd eat on the course, like, so I think it's probably changed since then, even so, because I think sports science in golf is changing a little bit, and they're becoming a little bit more receptive to it. But at the same time, just an interesting point of note, I don't have much experience, but I would imagine that in the days around competition, you would be fairly regular in what you're eating, because you want to be fairly regular most of the time.
Yeah, I'm pretty much like that. Anyways, but definitely with an like improvement of technology has just made my life a lot easier. I gotta be honest. Like it's a lot more flexibility with the things I like to eat. So I'm not as wound up about all this stuff, like the fact that it can communicate with an insulin pump, manage blood glucose on like a competition days, things like that. Like I remember I did like the Youth Commonwealth Games, and it was held in the Isle of Man, and it was the first time that I wore a bodysuit for competition. And it just knocked out my my pump site in the heats, and then I had a competition like a couple of hours later. And so I had no access to insulin for like a few hours. I was cramping. I think my blood glucose levels were like 27.5, and I'm on the I'm on the start line of like an international competition, and that just wouldn't happen for any diabetic athlete now. And it's only been like 10, 11 years. So I'd like to think things are on the up for diabetic sports people. Yeah.
They definitely are. You see more professional athletes now that are diabetics, I suppose. But I'm just thinking there, like you have been a big meathead in your past. So is there any problems presented with focusing on hypertrophy and eating in a calorie surplus because of your condition?
I actually think it's the opposite. This is purely anecdotal, but I think just a really well-timed dose of insulin, like straight into the gut, it can't be the worst thing for just getting huge. I've had no issues. It's actually a problem for me as someone who wants to run fast. I'm too large. Like if I was to select one thing which would just make life easier for me, would be to lose muscle. And like I did like 10, 12 months of no upper body lifting. Probably didn't lift over 2 or 3 reps in like any exercise, and it just, I don't know, it won't go away. And it sounds like the worst complaint, but it's real when it comes to the sport that I'm doing anyway.
And does it ever occur then with any athletes as well that you have to have that conversation with them, or is it always the other side of it?
How do you mean?
In that, like, sometimes you're like, maybe if we lose a little bit of mass, you might be better able to accelerate, or is it the opposite side with them? You're trying to get them more like yourself.
I get like, yeah, my athletes and myself, complete opposites. Like I'm a meathead. I've probably only coached one meathead athlete who was a female, and she was really lean and like had great body comp and stuff like that. But I don't really ever want to have the conversations about diets or anything like that. I always just want to try to refer that to someone else, because it's just not my wheelhouse. Like, and I've seen like some coaches really, especially in athletics, right, where you have power to weight ratios a real thing. But like sometimes the athletes just focus on it so much that they completely compromise other things. And I don't want to be responsible for like an eating disorder or something like that.
Yeah.
I want it done well, and from someone who has that experience. I don't really want to touch that. Yeah.
And it's extremely common in athletics as well, eating disorders, probably more so than other sports, which is, I just want to touch on this now for a second, because sometimes when we look from outside athletics into athletics, it can, that's why I asked, because it can seem like the athletics coach is the number one. There's no one else around them. Do you know, in other sports, you will have a team of coaches around the team, but it can seem like the athletics coach is the only person, and that's where the book stops, and they have to come up with everything. So it is very important to you to have people that you trust, that you can refer out to for things that are beyond your scope.
Absolutely. And like that's why I'm so lucky with the athletes that I coach. I've also, it's not just me, I've got a guy named Louis who he did his sports science stuff, and then also a guy named Mike who runs like a exercise phys rehab thing, and he lectures that at a university here. And so, you know, he can actually give clinical professional advice, but also he's just got such a great list of contacts, and I've also got some contacts and stuff like that. Yeah, you need to, I always like sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I'm just an English teacher, you know, I have no formal education in any of this whatsoever. So sometimes that lets doubt creep in a little bit, but a lot of the time it's a really humbling experience as well. And you just got to say, hey, you know, for diets, for example, you need to see someone if you're concerned about it. See someone, right? It shouldn't end at the athletics coach. We don't know. We're not trained in it. We don't know it. Yeah, that's where I sort of go with that. Yeah.
And it happens with lots of coaches as well, where they nearly take on too much. And they try to do too much, and then because of that, everything that they do is diluted, and it's not of as good a quality as it probably could be. So I'd be interested to ask you, because you've had that team for a number of years, are you quite good at delegating responsibilities to each other, or does it ever still get to a stage where you think, Jesus, I probably am doing a little bit too much here, I could probably pass this on to Louis or to Mike or somebody else?
Yeah, it happens organically, like where I don't really run like a it's, you know, it's barely profitable, like from a time to
every
money
coaching,
you know, it's not, the operation isn't too much to handle. And it's really clear that if there's any sort of like rehabilitative need or something like that, this is going to be Mike's, you know, and then if it ends up being myself and Louis who sort of take on like the more competitive kind of athletes with the medical support of Mike. Originally, like Louis' background is in long jump and mine's in hurdles. But it ended up being that we just mainly coaching sprinters anyway, so it doesn't really matter as much as we'd like long jumpers and hurdlers to come through the door. Yeah.
But there's just not that many of them. That's the issue.
There's not heaps, yeah. It's a niche thing, yeah.
Yeah, and when you start off as a coach, you think, I'm going to have this real niche coaching business where I'm going to just coach this athlete prototype. But you very soon realize, like, there's not enough of these people out there. And if they were all just coming to me, they're probably competing against each other in those events anyway. So it wouldn't probably be the best thing if they were all just training with the one coach.
Yeah, not at all. And like, you know, and also in the end, it's sort of the last couple of years, I just realized that most of the issues in hurdling and also in long jump because I've tried to learn a little bit there. That is most people just need to address the running component anyway. Like the greatest sort of variable that you need to push for in long jump is sort of like the velocity going into the board, and then probably from my experience with the hurdles, it just seems to be takeoff mechanics are the things is the main thing, which just everyone seems to mess up because of the way it was taught from a young age. And takeoff mechanics for hurdles is just like good running. You know, you just try to get the center of the ground contact under the center of mass a little bit more, so you can go sort of horizontally as opposed to like just pole vaulting every hurdle that comes their way. So even if we were like, yeah, let's do hurdles, let's do long jump, all that crap, in the end, it just ended up being that we needed to become better sprinting coaches anyway to try and help people. So when they do come through the door, we've got better solutions. So, yeah.
Every single one of the sports, it's just timing, really, isn't it? And then just teaching the rhythm. So like stride to stride, it has to be similar, or don't like using this word, but I suppose as optimal as possible, whatever the hell that means. For the athlete, I think it just means that for each person, it's going to be slightly different. Whereas when people hear optimal initially when they're younger, I suppose they think it's this holy grail to get to, that everybody needs to get to this one point, and that it's possible to get to, but it's just about figuring it out, isn't it?
Yeah. You'd be surprised, like with hurdles in particular, like the only event where it's like there is an optimal rhythm. Like everyone takes the same amount of strides in a hurdles race. You know, you have like 8 to the first and 3 in between each. So the patterning is actually very preset rhythmic based. So it's really easy, for example, if you've got a race and you can try and figure out how far you take off or what coming into the hurdle is. You could pretty much put a piece of tape over either 100 or 110 meters hurdles race, and you should be able to outline where every foot strike should go almost. And it'll be slightly different for everyone, but it'll be quite close. But you're right, like long jump, like it is a rhythm for them. Yeah, there's so many different strategies. I guess hurdles, there are a couple of different strategies, but yeah, so I just had to nerd it.
I'm big on the nerding it as well. So if we pull it back, then are the stride lengths very similar for each athlete in that race that does well? Or because of the height difference in them, is there a bit of
takeoff?
variation?
Yeah, takeoff distance would be a little bit different, but you'll probably find that the way the distance in between hurdles, depending on the takeoff and the touchdown of each athlete, you'll find that the way those 3 strides in between are proportioned will be quite similar from like a ratio standpoint. Like everyone sort of goes short, long, short, for example. So you're not really like blocking into the takeoff. So each stride, it is quite formulaic, the hurdles, even though it looks like, and in the end though, you could just smash one. You could just demolish the first hurdle, and then it's like, okay, well, we've got to refine rhythm at some point, but it's going to be chaotic for a few hurdles at the very least, probably until that happens. Yeah.
But in terms of KPIs then for it, is a lot of a consistency between that rhythm or that stride length, stride rate, etc.
Yeah, I think it's different. It depends on where they're at in their hurdles journey. You know, like with, for example, just got like, we do have one female hurdler, and she is sort of coming back into the sport after a couple of years, but as a junior, like when you're young, you're not fast enough, you're not powerful enough to try and actually do the hurdles right. And most coaches will create terrible environments to actually promote good hurdles mechanics. So I remember, for example, when I did hurdles, when you're 13, you go over like 90-meter hurdles, and you're meant to do 3 strides in between, but you end up doing 5 strides, or maybe you're so slow that you do 4 strides, and then it looks clunky. And rather than the coach should just pull the hurdles in pretty much. No elite hurdler trains on competition spacing, because otherwise it will just demolish the rhythm. It'll demolish the takeoff. So for her, for example, rather than having the hurdles at full height in training, we just try to pop the hurdles down rather than being on full space, and we bring them in, and we can have more repetitions to work on the rhythm and the stride. Try to get the short, long, short, get the takeoff mechanics looking really poppy. But maybe you're looking at something completely different when you're an Olympic finalist or something like that. Those should be the fundamentals. And I think that some athletes who are quite competitive could still like pull it back and look at the fundamentals, but I don't know. I don't really like.
We don't know.
I'm not on that level. I'm not on that level. Yeah.
None of us know anything. So then if you're working at the competition level height and spacing, I would imagine that's incredibly taxing in training, because you're having to output so much force to get over the hurdle and to keep the strides the same. Because if like you only perform that once in a competition, why would you go at that intensity for multiple reps in a training session? Maybe once every so often, but if you're doing that week on week, day by day, you'd just be absolutely battered, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and yeah, it is like both more and less intense. It's like less intense in the sense because the velocities are probably, if you're not there, like the velocities may not be as high, as you're able to go through multiple hurdles, right? But I 100% agree. And like, but that also could just be the nature of athletics. Like if you've got a really elite sprinter, for example, your session might just be 2 60-meter sprints or something like that, because the outputs are so high. I don't think the outputs, maybe they're not, because the velocity is lower in hurdles, for example. You should be able to get some more runs in and stuff like that. But I don't know. Everyone seems to do it differently. I would agree with you. Like, let's tone it down a little bit, get more runs in, not tax it so much so it takes you a month to recover from this. Yeah.
It's going to be harder to get over the hurdles if you're running slower as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%.
Because 100%. You're having to put more force through the floor. Granted, it's in a longer time frame, but like in order to get over the hurdle that you would get over probably more efficiently if you struck the ground faster, if you get where I'm going with that.
Yeah. If you're having to muscle a hurdle,
exactly. I didn't want to use the word because people give it out, but
yeah, it's totally right. So yeah, it's the same with sprinting and stuff like that. Just trying to put your athletes in really good positions to just try and make it quicker, I guess. Yeah.
I just didn't want to say it because sometimes when you say tenderness and muscle bound athlete, people just have a fucking, I don't know, a meltdown. But at the same time, I think there's merit in using it. And when you use these terms, people have to realize we are generalizing. That's exactly what we're doing. So that's okay to do in that scenario. And it's okay. And it's very important to classify your athletes, even if you're only doing it in 2 groups. Obviously, you could do it in more groups than that, but sometimes we don't have time, don't we know?
Yeah, I agree. Like I love sprint archetypes or athlete archetypes. It kind of just helps me organize things a little bit better. But you're totally right. I think that, for example, if someone was to call Ben Johnson a muscle-driven athlete, it's like, okay, we get it. He can squat 1 billion kilos and he bench pressed 170 kilos before breaking a world record. But if you were to watch Ben Johnson is an extremely tendinous, elastic beast as well. And just because he can, just because he is jacked and muscly and he can squat heavy, doesn't mean that like his ground contact times would be that compromised. Maybe it's just slightly biased towards, or maybe just that classification can maybe just help the coaching staff or other people watching this event try to understand how they can just write a nice narrative for success. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I see it very, very similarly. Like I think the classification makes the most impact in that it allows us to break our training groups into further groups for their own training. Because if you have a training group of even 12 plus, it's very, very difficult if there's only one coach to have a completely individualized approach with every athlete. So by grouping them and putting them into groups and training together, it makes it a little bit easier for us to coach. And then they hopefully will get more out of each session because the coach is able to do more, essentially. So that's where I think it's probably shows the most value. But at the same time, we're not saying that a muscle-bound athlete just uses muscle, and we're not saying a tendinous athlete just uses tendon. But I think that's where people get their knickers in a twist, essentially. But I want to bring it back now, because you mentioned and downplayed your day job as an English teacher earlier on, but all good coaches are good teachers. So I would find that probably your role within that terrible trio that you have of Mike Louie and yourself, I would say that you add incredible value, because athletics and sport in general, it's all about teaching and learning. So has anything that you have learned from your day job impacted positively on your approach to your coaching in terms of athletics?
Yeah, massively. I mean, and it even should be said that like a lot of my favorite coaches of all time are sprinters, teachers. Like they are daytime teachers, and you know, I find that inspiring in a sense as well, because teaching is it's a draining experience. But I would say, an example of how teaching can translate really nicely to the coaching thing is that even last week, I was marking like 100 year 7 English essays, and it was their first task of high school and stuff, and they were writing an essay, and it was about the concept of identity and all this stuff. And when I'm providing feedback, I'll find that essentially I just try to hit on the big rocks to make them better, and that looks very different for everyone. So when you're providing feedback, it shouldn't be so overwhelming that they can't be actionable. It should be quite easy. So I think that I find that quite transferable. You know, how can we get this essay from complete incoherence to, okay, you have an argument? And but in saying that, if a student can't spell like a 5-letter word as a 13-year-old, it's like, okay, is the content that I'm actually providing for them, is that relevant at all for their development? And I think that's the exact same in training. You know, if I'm asking them to do a particular modality and it's just not appropriate for their level, you're going to get nothing out of them, and you're not going to make the gains that you really want. But the number one teaching standard for like Australian teachers, the thing that you learn teaching first thing at university is know your students and how they learn. And I think that's a really good driving force for good coaching, especially in a sport like athletics, which is an individual sport. And I think that because our group isn't so large that it's become so impersonal, I think really trying to place an emphasis on how each person reacts to particular stimulus, or how each person likes to learn stuff. I think that being a bit of a driving force for good coaching is a worthwhile foundation. Yeah.
So then when you're doing your programming for those athletes, do you often think about what am I trying to teach here, rather than, well, you will be at the same time, but rather than thinking what is the physical adaptation that I'm seeking? So you prioritize maybe the learning component over the physical adaptation, or are they merged in a way?
With the programming, it's all about the adaptations. It's, you know, but I guess if I didn't know the athlete, we wouldn't really know which adaptations or if we didn't know the athlete or the event or where they are in their journey towards a particular goal, we wouldn't be able to prescribe a good program. So I guess knowing them in the first place, knowing them inside and out, to try and figure out what is the best training program for them. I think, yeah. And then, but the learning thing comes when you're actually coaching. Like programming to me isn't coaching. It's where we're there in the flesh and they're doing some runs and deciding whether or not to show film, for example. because sometimes I've shown film to an athlete on the day after a run, and it's literally disastrous, and it makes everything worse. And sometimes, like, and Louis is fantastic at this, where you'll take some footage from a session and then compile it into like a kilogram, or turn it into a little Word doc and send it off to the athlete. And maybe that's good, but maybe another athlete just wouldn't care, and they just it just wouldn't be digested very well. So I think that when it comes to the actual coaching, knowing how to talk to them, I don't know, it's just soft skill stuff, which I'm not sure if teaching teaches that or not, or if it's just a nature
practice,
thing.
Probably
it's just a practice thing. Saying the wrong stuff sometimes and not saying it again. I think it may be it.
That's what I was
just
going
having
to
heaps
say.
of reps at it. Yeah.
You just get more and more reps, but like I was going to ask you, did you find out the hard way in terms of giving that video feedback to the athlete, and then they're just looking at it and it's like, yeah, cool. Then they just walk away, or yeah.
It's not so much that, because if you're doing athletics, you're in the moment, you want to run fast, like your adrenaline's probably a little bit hot as well. So you're really engaged, but there could be instances where, especially if athletes have been told other things by other coaches or in other environments, and you could say, I want you to do this with your leg, for example, and you could be having a 5-minute conversation about the positioning of where one leg is in time and space, and have a 5-minute conversation, and then like, and then right after that conversation, they'll be like, but what about the arm? And I'm like, okay, well, this didn't really sink in as well as I thought it would. Maybe I should just shut up, and instead of this being a discourse, the dialogue, like, let's just try and manipulate the environment so we don't have to talk about it.
I was going to say that I do. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean, but I was going to say the most powerful word that you used there was probably conversation, because that's the most important thing in the coaching. And then I was thinking, because you're putting constraints on, because the conversation isn't working, is the conversation devalued? But then I was thinking, it isn't, because you wouldn't figure out that the conversation wasn't valued without having the conversation. As exactly mad as we both sound now.
And then you find, you learn about this, you know your students and how they learn. And then you just don't have a conversation again.
Just constraint. So to touch on constraints, then I've watched both of your sprinting presentations, the acceleration one and the simplifying sprinting one. Actually, when you first released them, I thought they were great. But what I was really interested in was the funky looking running drills that you've come up with, which you are using to seek adaptation and to improve learning with the athletes. So like, how did you come up with them? Where were you inspired from to come up with them? And I am referencing, say, the funky looking hip focused dribble work with the exergeni, or the sled push/pull.
Yeah, that's a super Mike thing. That is so up Mike's alley. But as you said earlier, everything is timing and coordination. And so some of the athletes who did that sort of work, it was essentially trying to teach people how to use their hip extensors as like a primary means for propulsion. And people do this all the time with, like sled pushing is a super common thing, but we just sort of, when we're watching the athletes in upright running postures, they would really like to spend a lot of time on the ground and really push heavily through their calf musculature, for example. And it was typically like some athletes who had like super jacked calves and really tight quads. And so it's like, put the semantics aside, it was like they were running without hip extensors, and it was just like a quaddy long time on the ground calf push. And essentially that sort of stuff was just looking to try open up the hip, like the rec fem and the hip and the hip flexors, but also try and give that sensory feedback for what it is like to hit toe off position, because and to find hip extension. And I think it's really good that they did it in an upright posture, as good as like Pilates is, or like hamstring bridging is, or chucking someone in like a glute ham raise or something like that. If we can have them in an upright posture, able to get some kind of sensory feedback, try to understand what it is like to hit hip extension, because it's from that moment, especially with these athletes in particular, because they like to really plantar flex into the ground. You'll find that their next stride is quite late, because after toe off position, the hip flexion becomes delayed. And then the next stride, it sort of compounds. The next stride will like land quite far in front of center of mass, and then they're on the ground for a long time again, pushing heavily with their calf musculature. So it's sort of just trying to give them a bit of sensory feedback about what it is like to hit toe off, and can we combine that sort of stuff with a lot of dribble work to try and get out of that position into hip flexion, so the next stride isn't late, and we can just constantly try have a good cycle of good ground contact positions, because that's what just running is, I guess.
So then I have two questions in relation to ground contact positions and how they are moving, I suppose. Did you find that ankle stiffness for those athletes wasn't at the same level that it maybe would have been for athletes that were better in terms of hip extension, or was it the opposite? And I know that it's a very much a chicken or the egg scenario here. Is one affecting the other, or is it happening because of this? And then my second question to follow on from that is, where were you and Mike influenced from, or who influenced you into coming to this conclusion around hip extension?
So as far as the ankle stiffness thing goes, I don't think it's any coincidence that the athletes who did that had a history of calf problems or Achilles problems. And so with one of them even having like a rec fem tear from footy days, I think, right? So their ankle stiffness wasn't great. But yeah, so and pretty much like athletes who are able to position themselves in good sprinting positions, they will, like, every ground contact is a great opportunity to improve ankle stiffness, both probably from a physiological and probably from a motor learning sort of standpoint, right? So yeah, they didn't have the best like springy ankle possible. Like it all ties together. And as far as the learning, where we got this sort of thing from, I don't know. It's just like sled push, because we'll do the same thing with sled pushing, and that's sort of in a little bit more of like an acceleration posture. That the exogeny was just a little bit more convenient for upright postures. And maybe like people would probably be like, what the hell? Yeah, in the sense that once you're in those upright postures, like the force vectors would be more vertically oriented. And maybe it's just kind of dumb to have something pulling you from behind while you're there, but whatever, it's fine. it worked fine. And even when you are in those upright postures, there's going to be extended periods of time where you are still trying to create horizontal impulse until that point in which you're just like hammering down and you're at max velocity.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love them. I was just interested because obviously I would probably have been influenced in that way from maybe a Franz Bosch, David Gray standpoint. I was going to say Dan Pfaff, but probably not. And I know like Graham Morris has a great quote, never go full Bosch, but definitely there's merit in doing some of it. And then in terms of like the force and using the exogeny from behind, like it is just manipulating force and they're overcoming resistance when they're doing it. So like, the resistance doesn't really matter. And because you're looking for a horizontal vector, it's definitely useful. And I would say that you've just come up with the right tool for the right scenario there. Whether it would work with everybody, it might not, but in terms of the outcome of that, did you see a great, like, positive outcomes with those athletes in terms of improving both their hip extension and their ankle stiffness? And then second question, did you use anything to complement that within, say, their gym programming, from both trying to improve maybe the force of their hip extension, improving their ankle stiffness using exercises in the gym, or do you think that it was mainly a timing or co-contraction kind of issue?
It was probably like a bit of a timing co-contraction-y type thing. It was probably as much as anything, just like range, like the mobility. Are they even able to hit hip extension in the first place? And sort of just, it was almost like a loaded stretch, to be honest. But yeah, it was really just like a nice learning tool. I don't know if I don't know if that exercise contributed to like godlike hip extension power or anything like that, but it did give like a reference point for the athlete to go from, as because those exercises we used with athletes who we just couldn't accelerate really hard, pretty much. And so when we were able to get them back up and running a little bit faster, as we were looking at footage or as they were running, they were able to sort of like, just as we wanted, get some like as soon as that hip extension's done, let's recycle and get into the next stride. So I don't know if there were like any wild physiological adaptations.
Yeah,
it was a bit of learning. I think it was just a good bit of learning, if anything. Yeah.
So then when they were accelerating, were you finding that they were pushing incredibly hard and not really going anywhere?
So with both of them, with a bunch of we've only used this exercise for just a couple of people, and we're just sort of finding that the timing was really off for everyone. Gosh, it's been a while since I've used this exercise, I must admit. But it was sort of like, for one athlete in particular, who really, first stride was just like a complete knee extension experience, and the timing wasn't there. And every stride was really late. Every stride was a block. And there'll be moments in which, after this sort of intervention, you could see it work really well, but then in reality, like these are athletes in their late 20s, and I was finding that we're trying our hardest to like create good learning environments, but it's difficult, and probably didn't translate as much as I'd like in the end. I just wanted, in the end, I think that because it was good for when they weren't accelerating super hard, but if they could have just accelerated really hard with resisted, unresisted acceleration, I would a million times out of a million prefer that than like a special exercise like the exogeny hip push or sled pushes. So it was good. It was good for the time, but I wish we didn't have to use it, almost, because we would just be running. That'd be the best. Yeah,
that'd be the best, but we can't always do what the best is, because we're presented with problems, such as what you just touched on. So like, when you were looking at that late acceleration, I suppose, are you focusing mainly on the switch and then where their foot strike is? Are they your two cues, or are you looking at something else?
In terms of late acceleration, it's funny, right? Because I think that so much of late acceleration ends up being a byproduct of early acceleration, which is why I like to probably bias more of a short to long sort of training modality with athletes if all the cards are available. So as far as late acceleration, I actually find that sometimes when people just get up into upright postures, it's like all of a sudden they just start, like chopping cucumber. Everything is up, down, up, down, up, down. And I'm like, you probably still have another 20 meters of let's try and rip the crap out of the track and go forwards before we have to get to the this stage where we are in postures, or we have exhausted sort of like our capacity to create horizontal impulse, and we need to start just purely trying to maintain the speed that we've created. So I actually, I've found myself in terms of late acceleration, they're not even like cues which are technical or anything like that. It's like, can we just try to keep going forward? Like, can we have like aggression in trying to hunt some more velocity before we start just trying to hit stuff under the hip so much and be so pretty?
I asked that question ineffectively. I shouldn't have used the word late acceleration, but I didn't want to stop you because that's not exactly what I was asking, but that's where I was going afterwards. So it's 100% okay. So when we're looking at that, then do you try and focus on, I know you use a short to long approach and you have a big emphasis on acceleration. So are you trying to get your athletes to accelerate for effectively, I know it depends on the athlete, but for as long as possible so that they can get to a higher max velocity or max speed? And then what do you use as your cue to say, right, I've done enough focus on their acceleration now that I can now move to focusing more on their max velocity? And this might be just in relation to, say, your more novice athletes or your team sport athletes rather than your elite sprinters, say.
So with like the more novice athletes, for everyone, we kind of just theme days as like acceleration, max velocity. This is for the novice athletes, and then they have like something with a bit more capacity, so they'll try to run 3 days a week. And I think that it's hard to 100% say right, because everyone is a little bit different. Like that answer is so much easier for just a pure track person. For team sport athletes,
you can answer for a track person if you want.
Okay, yeah. So because like for a track person, I don't actually think you're trying to. You don't want. You need to sort of figure out where there's a diminishment in the increase of velocity, essentially, and if you can try and attribute that to poor kinematics. So at what stage, literally, is it like stride 3? That stride is not contributing to an increase in velocity. And if that's the case, and if you're finding that acceleration mechanics are limiting your capacity to reach high max velocity, then we will happily do acceleration 2 times a week. Like we'll do heaps of acceleration, resisted, unresisted. For novice and team sport athletes, I think what I've done with team sport athletes and what we're doing with like the exercise phys guys, for example, if we're only seeing them once a week, and this is what I've had when I worked with an NRL guy, and I just saw him once a week, and I just did a bulk amount of acceleration, trying to focus on the early stages of acceleration so it wouldn't truncate his potential at a later point. And then we did a bunch of drilling. I love dribbles, and I'm just trying to teach them how to cycle and strike the ground vertically and try to pull the heel back under the hip. And then over time, try and elongate the accelerations, because by the time they're reaching 30 or 40 meters, if they're a novice or a field sport athlete, they're really close. They're probably around where the max velocity is.
Sometimes after 20, mate.
Literally,
on the athlete.
100%. So for me, I just like to do. I love resisted acceleration. Do a ton of it. It's the best opportunity to learn. And then concurrently, if you're not confident, because maybe you're like, this dude's going to rip a hamstring if he goes up to 40 meters. I like dribbles. I like wickets. I like something to just slow them down and to try and find the shapes and the postures which would contribute to whatever you believe to be good sprinting. So, yeah.
Great use of words there. It's better than saying optimal, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is it. And sometimes like it's fine that they accelerate very quickly, because that's going to be advantageous in their sport. So like that's okay, but if we can try to elongate it, what we're doing, I suppose, is trying to improve their max velocity, which will in turn then, chicken before the egg again, hopefully improve their acceleration within the sport, and improve their performance within the sport if they can get up to a higher max velocity. But I love that you said as well about the sleds, because it's just easy for us as coaches as well, because that is a constraint essentially, like, and you throw it on and they will find the position without us having to coach them. And if they are a team sport athlete or a novice athlete, they're not going to be as well able to digest our language around the position, around sprinting mechanics, acceleration mechanics, because they haven't experienced it yet. And that's partly on us, I suppose, and our use of language, and we have to make it simpler. But at the same time, it's a lot easier than making our language simpler that to just throw a weight on them and get them to sprint. And it's probably easier for them as well, because it's less total stress, because they're not having to completely just focus in on what we're saying and then find a position. All they have to worry about is finding the position, essentially.
And I find that acceleration actually I think it fills a hole for which many people haven't found the adaptations for in the gym. And like the sad reality when it comes to sprints, that if they're soft, if they don't have just basic strength, like acceleration isn't viable. Or maybe you've got an athlete who is strong, but they're not like powerful and they're able to find enough displacement to even create a negative foot speed to get the foot back under the hip. So, if they pretty much got a pudding CNS, and you just need them to sprint a lot, you can find some amazing power adaptations by just doing a ton of resisted acceleration, and to afford them enough flight time, especially, so that they're able to find themselves in good positions back under the hip. Yeah.
And it's interesting as well, because sometimes with those athletes that aren't soft, as you said, to use your own words, I'll find that they try to push incredibly hard when they're accelerating, because that's all they know. So then with that athlete, it's a case of sometimes teaching them to relax a little bit so that they can get into the range of motion and the position where that they can then get high negative foot speed and push back against the floor. Whereas with the other athlete that is soft, it's a case that you're trying to just get them to actually push hard. And that's their primary goal, I suppose, of the training. Would you find something similar?
Yeah. Like I've been helping out at school with some coaching stuff, and I did one day where I had like athletes. They were from year 5, so 10 years old, all the way through to 17, and you'll see in those early, like those 10-year-olds, they just don't have the strength to get going. So it's like. Yeah, they'll push really long, and they'll find themselves out really big backside mechanics, and it'll flop over. And you just can't do much about it, to be honest. You just got to keep them running. And something that I really like that British athletics do is essentially they do testing where they do even something as simple as counter movement jump, and 5-meter times. And essentially, if you've got whatever their minimum threshold for counter movement jump is, if you've got a counter movement jump which is good, but your 5-meter time sucks, and you can attribute it to the kinematics, as opposed to if your counter movement jump sucks and your 5-meter sucks, it's like, okay, it's kinetics at the very, like, as a bottom level here. So the best thing for you right now, probably, like, sure, the running's important, everything's important, but you probably just have to get stronger, more powerful, and you can get that from the gym, you can get that from the track, and it might just take a little bit of time to get there.
And it's better to get it from both as well, rather than one
or
the other.
Absolutely.
Which is your question you always get as a strength and conditioning coach is, what can I do in the gym to make me faster? It's like, First of all, who are you? I haven't a clue who you are. I've never seen you run. So how can I answer this question? But most athletes don't sprint enough, and not even sprint enough. They don't accelerate enough. And that's what the sled pulls allow us to do, is we get to get more accelerations in, because we are limiting the speed that the athletes can output and get to. So then there's less risk, essentially. But we've gone deep into the weeds there, and we've probably alienated almost all of the audience.
Yeah.
But we found it interesting, I suppose. So hopefully somebody else will. But I think a big focus of what we've just spoken about is focusing on the how over the what. And that kind of goes back to that question that I just say you get asked all the time: what should I be doing? Rather than, well, how are you doing it? Do you think that for a long time, coaches have been focusing too much on the what over the how, in terms of they're focusing on volumes of training, intensities of training, rather than how is this athlete achieving the movement solution that we want, or how are they getting from A to B?
Yeah, I think so. Like that's my personal preference, because I always think that the technical development should underpin pretty much, should be like at the base of training, and hopefully good technique can elicit good physical adaptations as well. And you need this sort of technical development to be able to withstand stress. So I always kind of try and to go with more of the how. I will say that I won't say that I've flipped it, but I've found that, and this is one of my like reflections after this season, is I think we've done a good job in creating good technical models with some of the athletes, but sometimes I'm like, we haven't been out. I don't know if it's because of COVID or because of whatever it is. We just haven't been able to get enough work done. So we can match these awesome kinematics with like beastly kinetics. Can we have someone who moves really well, who can really punch the crap out of the ground, but I'd like to think that now that we've made a lot of these good technical changes, then that the how almost isn't even a question. It's like, let's just go. Let's, you're moving fantastic. We like the way this is looking. Let's, and there have been good positive outcomes out of the changes in the how. And maybe it might be a little bit of time for the what. Yeah, but I think the how should come first, and I think it's just it's a tragedy when you're trying to address the how, in your mid-20s, as opposed to the how being addressed in early stages of athletic development.
Yeah, and that is it, that we go immediately to the what, and then we just get a ton of junk volume that we're not doing what we actually should be doing, and we're just we're hoping but that by doing more of it, we'll get better at the thing that we're not doing anyway. So even though you're saying now you may have gone off the other edge of that, knowing the how is a prerequisite to then doing the what, as you just said, and you probably won't make that mistake again. You will know when to say, right now, we just need to increase the intensity, increase the volume, and probably not worry about it as much. But it probably comes back to educating both coaches and athletes about the how, in order to get rid of this kind of problem that we're facing, in that coaches are just far too focused on the volume and intensities and not focused on how athletes are moving or how they are getting from A to B. And I think I know we've gone deep into it there, but we could use probably a little bit simpler language to talk about it. And they're very simple concepts that athletes should be made aware of, I think. And definitely coaches should be aware of.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think the thing is like some people already, I don't know, they've just came out of the womb and they have their movement is just the best. It's amazing. Like I've had one athlete who I would never dare try to teach them how to run, because it's just beautiful. So at that stage, it's like, what are we doing here? How are we gonna make you better? And so maybe it is in track environments at the very least, in early stages of development, especially in Australia, because we don't really have a good pathway for athlete or coaching development. So essentially what you want to be is to pick up like someone who's 14 years old, flog the crap out of them, get them early Australian representation and be recognized as a fantastic coach. And so there's no real incentive to figure out the how, because one in every couple of hundred will already have the how figured out. Let's just flog it. and they'll be amazing because they're kids, but 100% the athletes and the coaches need to sort of figure out what is important for good sprinting, for good running, for performance. And are you actually addressing that, or as you said, are you just shotgunning it with some volume and some things stick? And
I'll give him a shout out here because I think it's great in terms of teaching tool for the athletes is Jonas Dodu's 3 principles of stiffness, switching, and projection. And if you can hit those 3 and teach the athletes about those 3, then you can teach them anything, I suppose. They'll understand what you're talking about. Now, another key principle, I think, especially when, actually acceleration and negative foot speed, and it probably does come back to switching too, is to teach them what negative foot speed is and what we're looking for in it. Because a lot of them, as you said, won't know. So they'll often crash in front and they will create a braking force rather than pushing back against the ground. But that does come back to the switching portion, I suppose, of what Jonas is talking about. I just think there's it's a very low hanging fruit probably for team sport athletes, which is who I'm working with predominantly.
100%. Yeah. The annoying thing is, though, you don't know if it's a switching thing, if it's coming from the backside, if it's coming from the front, or if their pelvis is just in a terrible position, it's impossible for them to do this, if they have the strength to make it happen, if they've got the power. And so that's why I think just finding that's why I quite like just trying to nail it in drills. And it's why I really like it in acceleration, because I'm like, this is the best time to make it happen. Once you've reached like high velocities, it's just chaos. Like it's too hard. It's so many forces to handle. I can't do it, and I can't do it well at all. And I've been doing the sport for, maybe it's just because my calves are too huge, and so the pendulum swings too hard and the lower limb just flies forward. But it's a hard skill. But I do really agree the simplification. Sorry, I keep going on tangents. What you said, I love Jonas's work, and I like having just 1 or 2 things really for an athlete to focus on. And it should be kind of common language, from same people within a coaching environment.
Mate, we love the tangents. That's why we're here. We're here for the tangents. People are here to listen to you. But yeah, and as you said, like in terms of getting up to max velocity, then when you're going that fast, often with team sport athletes anyway, it's the opposite. You're trying to just teach them to relax at that speed, to allow themselves to continue to allow themselves to not expend too much energy, because they're probably just going to be slowing down anyway. So cruising is what I kind of use. Just cruise when you get to that velocity. Or I also love, I can't remember who I heard it from. It probably was Graham as well. The run sexy. It was actually Care, I think.
That was my thing.
That's yours, is it?
That's my thing, yeah.
Oh, mate, I used it like last week. That is brilliant.
Yes.
So I actually say to them, I was like, has anybody seen Baywatch? And then I say, when you get up there, just imagine you're running in slow motion, you're running sexy. And
you got to run sexy, yeah.
Yeah, and I think people actually, because like it's a rotational movement, sprinting, which is a strange concept to get to. But when you tell them to run sexy, they often get that concept of loading up on one side, if you get what I mean. Because
I do.
Well, I'm imagining I'm in Baywatch when I'm running and I'm David Hasselhoff and I'm Load and explode, which Angus Bradley will probably love this because he's all about the compression expansion, and that's essentially what it is: compression expansion, compression expansion.
Yeah.
But we've gone far too deep there now. People are going to be like, "What are these two morons
I could talk
talking about
this. I could talk about this for a really long time. Yeah, it's good to chat. Yeah,
it's good to chat. But let's move into quickfire questions. So just to finish. So the first quickfire question is your proudest achievement to date.
My proudest achievement to date. I wasn't sure whether this meant it was for myself. So when I thought about it, it was actually when I was most proud was watching my partner at the Commonwealth Games in gymnastics, and she was doing rhythmic gymnastics. And I was by them by myself, and I was just in the crowd. And rhythmic gymnastics, all female sport, the entire crowd female. I'm just there by myself, like crying with pride because she was just amazing. So that was my proudest sort of moment, I think. Yeah.
Mate, you're such an English teacher, like proudest achievement today. Oh, I wasn't sure because of the word where you went. Yep. You can't switch it off. You can't switch it off. I'll change it for everybody in future. What about your own proudest achievement to date, as well as your girlfriend has done in the Commonwealth Games, and props to her as well.
Yeah.
What about your 100%.
own? My own proudest achievement to date. I think my own proudest achievement to date was kind of finally mustering up the nuts to actually start coaching. And so I was like in Germany doing an exchange in the south down there, and it was something I just wanted to do. I just put it online. I don't know. I should make this a sports thing. Okay. Representing Australia in hurdles is really good. Winning a few nationals is fantastic. And playing footy and kicking like a bomb from about 75 out was probably my best thing. I'm not, no cap. It was a big buffer. Yeah.
You just let fly. No, mate, I love all of those, to be honest. And I think it says a lot about you as a person that two of your proudest achievements, or the first one anyway, is about somebody else. The second one is about getting the courage to go then and help other people. And it's only on thirdly that you start thinking about yourself and your ego-driven achievements, which are important as well. We all need them too, especially kicking a bomb from 75. Second one then is favorite athlete of all time. Your favorite athlete of all time.
Yeah, I'm a huge AFL fan. I've been a Swans member for a long time. So I think Adam Goodes is probably my favorite athlete of all time. He was a beast. Yeah.
And you were there a couple of weeks ago, weren't you, for who was it, Buddy?
Yeah, Buddy Franklin. Have you watched footy before?
Yeah, it's on every morning here. There's so many Irish players in it.
Yeah.
There's probably more in the AFLW than there is in the men's at the moment. And they're all absolutely killing it. And I'm actually getting a couple of them on this season of the podcast. So it'll be interesting to talk to
awesome.
them. Yeah. Because it's just so interesting the crossover between the two sports. But in recent years, you're probably seeing, I know a few Aussies I've met before used to slag us that all the Irish players that came over probably 15, 20 years ago, they were just crazy fit, crazy fast, but they couldn't kick the ball straight at all. But now we're seeing probably more forwards over there. And I think it's probably because they're being brought over at a younger age and being taught how to kick the footy.
One of my favorite players all time, Ty Kennelly, the man, to win the flag in 2005, do a jig while getting your medal. I was like, anyway, he's one of my favorites too. Yeah.
That's shown everywhere over here.
Yeah.
Third question then, artists you've been listening to a lot recently.
I'm really deep into my techno at the moment, and I've been liking Stefan Bodzin for like a bit over a year now. Yeah, the techno thing's only a new thing. That was the post-German experience thing. That's what I took home with me with a bit of language. So yeah, I want to come back, hit up Berlin sometime soon, get back there. Yeah.
I was going to ask you why you went to Germany, because
no, the unexpected positive. I used to hate it, but you got to live it. You absolutely have to live it. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's playing you in the movie?
I want Bill Hader to play him in a film. Not that we look alike, but I think he's hilarious. I want to see him in my position as a coach. I want to see Bill Hader, potential like Bill Hader, the English teacher, Bill Hader, the track coach in Bankstown, Sydney, would kill me. I love it.
Any meals you've been loving to date? And I'm interested in this one, given that you had a blog post or blog article about the 10 best foods for gains, essentially, or hypertrophy, was it?
I think it was like the 10 most anabolic foods you could possibly eat or something. And I think it was topped by either cream dry sauce, stroop waffles. I don't know. I live with an amazing cook, and it's been cold randomly, so I've been loving shepherd's pies.
They're the job, in fairness. I haven't had one in a
best.
very long time. We're going into summer, so I probably won't have one for another while. Any books you've been reading lately? And this is a very interesting one for an English teacher and a track coach.
I'm in a huge slump as far as reading goes at the moment. Like, because I'm only a new teacher, I'm trying to concurrently read, understand, and then teach stuff. So I'm like reading Shakespearean plays, which I haven't read before, and trying to teach it a week later.
What one are you doing
now? Macbeth was like a recent one, which is done, and it's my favorite.
I love
already. It. And mate, they're the best. Yeah, even 12th Night I did sort of recently with some Year 7 guys, and Shakespeare slaps. They're great stories. Yeah.
Mate, Macbeth is just it's so key, like it's the best. But useful for you as well now is probably they have both the Michael Fassbender Macbeth and there's one with Denzel as well. So like that's easy to just show to the kids and get a little bit of buy-in from them with it. But like you could go through that like so many times and get different things from it every single time. We had to do that for our Leaving Cert, and you just go down a rabbit hole with it.
It's cracker.
But it's deadly, yeah. So then the last couple of questions. First one is, what's the biggest thing you've learned in the last 12 months?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned the last 12 months is that I think you've got to have fun. You can't, it's been like huge professional development for myself, both coaching and teaching. And there was some like really stressful and sort of dark times over the last year and a bit. And it's something which just keep trying to tell myself, like I've got school holidays starting in next week, and I just want to, my main priority in those like next 6 months is just have fun. I want to go see my friends more. I don't want my reading to be just things that I'm teaching. So life is there to have fun. So I want to, that's my biggest lesson.
And then in turn, what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
When I was 18, I was like extremely anxious, and I was at university studying a degree which I never completed. And I would have just told my 18-year-old self just to quit uni, and make some, I quit uni anyway, but it happened 18 months later, and I could have just done the work that I was going to do anyway and go travel. So quit uni and chill out. And you don't doubt your intelligence. You just got to be in a good headspace to work, have fun. Quit uni was the biggest advice I would have given myself.
I think there's two very powerful lessons there for not only young coaches but young people in general, and not only young actually as well, but very important that as coaches we don't go too far off the other end and just coach and read and teach and whatever we're doing and get into a ball of stress where we're not enjoying it anymore. So look after yourself is very, very important. And then at the same time, university is a load of crap. So
it was good when I was teaching. It was good when I was doing a degree, which I was ready for and I wanted. But when you're 18, you just gone through school, just leave it alone for a bit. It's all right. Yeah.
I'm joking there as well. Obviously, it's a great experience, but there's value in doing whatever suits you, I suppose. So, Jack, brilliant chat. Really enjoyed it. Cheers for coming on, and glad to connect as well finally.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.